After much reluctance, in March this year, the Ontario government agreed to participate in a $10 a day childcare program started by the federal government. However, the fourth government changed rules, often causing frustration among childcare providers. One of the sticking points was paying for the additional services offered by some centers. After the government agreed to provide the funding, the deadline for centers to participate in the program was extended until November 1st. There are a total 203 daycare and early childhood education centers in Simcoe County. Out of these 203, 173, that is 87%, have opted in as of November 1st. But what is holding remaining centers from participating in the program? The program that will benefit thousands of families reeling under pressure due to rise in cost of living and stagnant wages. Why there is trust deficit between provincial government and the centers? What are the challenges ahead for the program? To get answers to these questions, we talked to Simcoe County's Director of Children and Community Services, Janssen. Good morning.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm good, good. Thank you. Thank you for joining me today.
Oh, you're welcome. Pleasure to meet with you.
Quickly about the Canada-wide early learning childcare program, right? So the deal
Mhm.
has been signed between the provincial and federal government early this year. Uh,
Correct.
and there was a reluctance from the provincial government to get on board with this specific program. So if you can just briefly talk about what this program is, especially with reference to Ontario government and County of Simcoe.
Okay. Yeah, happy to do that. So you will know that the federal government in its last budget included funding to support a Canada-wide early learning and childcare agreement. And once that budget was passed, the federal level began negotiating with all of the provinces. And Ontario signed on to that agreement at the end of March. And that's when we were advised by the Ministry of Education. Those are the folks we work most closely with at the province. And our role as the local consolidated municipal service manager is really to work with the community around facilitating the process of enrollment. And so in order to do that, we held a number of information sessions with licensed childcare operators, actually many information sessions as guidelines became available from the province and were further clarified. We continued to have those meetings. We had one-on-one meetings with operators and many phone calls so that they would be in the best position to decide whether they wanted to opt into the Canada-wide early learning and childcare program for their operational purposes. And what it means really is the all levels of government, we all want this to be successful. And the program is really about increasing quality, accessibility, making it more affordable for parents and young families, and making it more inclusive. So where are the populations we're missing? Who do we need to be reaching out to? Through the agreement, and now that is being implemented here in Ontario, what we're looking at is providing a 25% fee reduction for children under 6 years of age, retroactive to April of 2022 for families where the operator, where the program they attend has opted into the Canada-wide early learning and childcare program. And I'm really pleased to say that we have an enrollment rate as of November 1st of 87%, 173 out of 203 licensees who have opted in. And the ultimate goal really is by 2025-26 to see the average cost of a licensed childcare space across Ontario at around the $10 a day mark. So it's a program that I think will be good for families. It also includes an emphasis on stabilization of our workforce, efforts to create a more robust workforce so that we're able to actually build further spaces into the system as our population continues to grow. So I think that's sort of it in a nutshell.
Yeah. Yeah, and some informal discussions I had with some of the childcare centers. One of the things that they mentioned was, the kind of support and information they got from the county of Simcoe in terms of addressing the concerns they had, because
Right,
county of Simcoe doesn't play a role in enacting the legislations or the policies, but what you can do, I understand, is providing the clarity on what the provincial government has done in terms of enacting those policies. So you mentioned, as of now, 87% of the centers have been have registered, have opted in. So I believe,
yes,
so last month, by September, 2 months back, on September
yes.
1st, I think less than half of them were signed in, and some
Mhm.
of them had concerns about the curricular activities they do, maybe the camps they do, or different activities. So
Right.
what were the major concerns of those people, and now what are the concerns of the remaining
Yeah.
13
Yeah.
30%?
I think there's a couple of things. First of all, this is so new. It's such a different way to envision licensed childcare in Ontario. We are essentially building a public system. And yes, while we have to work in accordance with provincial guidelines, we then take those guidelines and build our own set of guidelines that operators are contracted to comply with. So wherever we have flexibility within provincial guidelines, you may see that in the actual operating guidelines that our operators are obliged to work with us around. So I think one of the concerns was just that it was so new. I think another concern was that the original set of guidelines that were released from the province back in April included pieces that made some operators really uncomfortable. For example, that there wouldn't be funding to support, you know, rental costs, that the service manager needed to set profit ceilings, that, particularly for commercial operators, I think there was a lot of concern around that. And, many have spent a lifetime building their business. I understand that. And then I think the other piece was concern around, as the fees were essentially frozen, that they were charging, operators were charging a set fee in March 29th, and were directed to freeze that rate. And I think the question was, is there enough funding in the system that our actual operating costs are going to be able to be fully covered? So it's the first year in implementation. I think there's just a lot of unknowns. And again, I believe everyone wants this to work, all levels of government, families, operators. It's just the first year, and there's concern around that. Now, there was another set of guidelines released in August. Some of those pieces were removed. The for-profit having to implement profit levels, that piece was taken out. Some of the ineligible expenses that were formerly included, they were removed. And so I think that, combined with just ongoing dialogue with us, where we tried to clarify based on what we understood, I think engendered greater confidence around actually opting in.
Yeah, that's interesting. So if it's 87% of overall, and I believe, which are public funded daycare, they must have opted 100%. So what is the percentage when it comes to private daycare? How much percentage of those have opted in for the subsidy?
I don't have those figures in front of me, to be honest.
Okay.
But I can tell you that it's not just commercial operators who opted out. There is a segment of nonprofit operators who have opted out as well. Some of them are smaller and didn't feel it was as relevant. In other cases, for example, part-time nursery schools. So it's not just commercial operators. And in fact, the vast majority of our commercial operators have opted in.
Okay, that's interesting. And in terms of the services, so I believe the federal government is going to provide around $10 billion to Ontario over the next 5 years, and the county of Simcoe is I think going to receive around 21 million, if I'm not
That's
wrong.
correct.
Yeah.
Yep, just
So
over
so
21 million.
so in terms of is that 21 million just for 1 year or over the next 5 years?
This is for this current
Okay.
year, and it will support the parent rebates. It will also support the workforce compensation. There is a piece in the guidelines that requires operators to move any registered early childhood educator not yet making $18 an hour to that place on the wage floor. So it will cover that as well. It will provide some assistance to operators who had to move some other staff to the minimum wage rate when it changed. And it will also provide for operating expenses that used to be covered through a higher fee. So when the fees were frozen, a number of operators hadn't yet increased their fees, but had been planning to and weren't able to. And so their concern is, I'm at a lower fee, there's been a high inflation rate, costs are escalating. And so our goal is to be able to cover all eligible costs within the funding allocation we've been given. This should not cost operators money to participate in. Our friends and colleagues at the ministry have said so many times, this is not a spending spree, but nor do we want people losing money because they've opted in to CWELC.
So in terms of how much, so once they opted in, once they opted in, they will have to provide the services at a fixed rate. For example, $10 per day. So in terms of if what is the flexibility they have in terms of if their operations cost goes up, if they plan to provide more services, maybe field trips or extra activities. So because when I was talking to some of the operators, that is one of the concerns they had was
Yeah,
what we want to upgrade or what we want to provide more services. What if our
yes.
cost goes up? So how much flexibility the county of Simcoe has in terms of providing more funding for the centers?
Yeah, that's a really fair question. So again, what our ministry colleagues have said is that they want licensed operators to be able to retain the flavor of their respective programs. They don't want to see programs watered down because of financial ramifications. We want quality programs. There's no point in increasing access and helping families if we're not providing really good care. So the ministry has built in an inflationary percentage. It is lower than operators would like it to be, and I understand that. At the same time, we are confident that within our 21 million allocation, that we will have enough what we're calling gap funding. So if we deem something to be an eligible expense, so for example, say an operator says, I'm going to bring in an instructor every day of the week and provide private karate lessons to our students. We can't afford that. We know we can't afford that. But if they say, we're bringing in someone who's going to be doing music on Wednesday afternoons, we would probably deem that an eligible expense. So there's going to be a lot of negotiating and a lot of, it's transitional year. There's no way around it. There's going to be bumps, but we are committed to covering eligible costs. And that's what we're trying to convey to the operators. And at the same time, the ministry saying to us, and you need to do that within your funding allocation. So we're constantly evaluating and analyzing with our internal financial friends around, what are the base commitments, money that has to go out, and what do we have left to cover those gap costs?
Yeah, so this first year, I believe that the childcare fees will be reduced. So the plan is by 2025, there will be
Yes,
$10 a day childcare, but this
yes,
year it's going to be cut down by 50%, and families are going to get retroactive April, what they have paid. So some of the daycares are waiting out because the impact is not that big, this first year for them, and families are also seeing the quality, how the quality, the impact
yep.
of quality, the impact on quality of this entire program. So in terms of what are the reservations, this the remaining 13% have, because there is a concern that they will have to opt in because of the pressure from the parents, right? The parents would be saving money if the centers opt in, but at the same time, as you mentioned, there could be an impact on quality. So that's what they are hoping the provincial government to do is to maintain the quality. And not only that, but if they want to, as you said, introduce programs in the future, upgrade their facilities, right? So there's a maintenance cost and other.
Yep.
So are those the concern of this remaining 30%, or even the centers who have opted in, or any other concerns as well?
First of all, again, I just want to reiterate, I'm not so certain that quality will go down. Our goal is to maintain and enhance quality. And we do work as a service manager all the time. We have a quality assurance program. We work alongside educators in their classrooms, sort of in a mentorship capacity. We want to see quality enhanced, as does the ministry. So in order to do that, we know there has to be funding available, and our provincial colleagues know that as well. I think to your question around what keeps the other 13% from opting in, there is still a concern from a commercial perspective that this may not be good for my operations. People are seeking legal advice, and rightfully, I understand that. And I've heard some people say we're going to wait and see how 2022 goes and consider 2023. So I've heard that as well. And again, there are a portion of operators for whom it's just not that big a deal either way. I don't say that lightly, but for a small nursery school program that runs 2.5 hours in the morning and 2.5 hours in the afternoon, parents are paying fees there that reflect what they're getting. It's not full days of care. So there are some programs for whom it's just not that applicable. But in terms of full day licensed childcare programs, we have a really good high percentage of people opted in. And, we'll do everything we can within our funding allocation to be reasonable, to be fair, we want this system to succeed. We've been waiting for this for 4 decades, the public system. I'm personally very excited about it.
Yeah, and that's as I mentioned when I talked to some of the centers, informally while working on this story. This is the message I got about the cooperation they got from the Simcoe of County, right, in terms of answering the question. So they were happy about that, but at the same time, as I mentioned, there is certain decision making with the provincial government.
Yes.
And specifically, as we see, it's very relevant that today our son is home because there is a school strike, right? And this one of the concerns they have is the level of engagement that from the provincial government that should be there is not there in many cases. So
Mhm.
so the
Mhm.
for example, in today's strike, the goal was to not have the strike. So that was the reason, for that 4,000 a day fine. But anybody, they went ahead with the strike because they have the inflation is going up. They have expectations regarding increase in the salary, and as we know, it's been hard on especially the working families, the impact of inflation and rising
Yeah.
interest rate. So this is the concern I get from some of the daycare is there is not so much level of trust coming from the provincial government, and I
I
think that's one of the reasons for they are holding out.
Yes. We've had that expressed to us for sure. Um, I think it's when you look at the timing that the federal government and the province signed on in late March, April was the deadline. So a lot of work got done very, very quickly. Was it perfect? Probably not. And what I will say is that the ministry has been responsive to hearing the concerns and did come out with a second set of guidelines, um, to try to encourage greater opt-in. The ministry has also committed, I was on a meeting again just very recently, that in developing a new funding formula, which is aimed at 2024, a very robust and new and thoughtful funding formula, that there will be much greater consultation. I think the lack of consultation, or the limited consultation, I would say, really has not been driven by a spirit of not wanting to engage with stakeholders and partners and systems. It's just been everybody's dancing as fast as they can. The ministry, as we are, operators are, this came very quickly. And I can see it when you're a frontline operator and something shifts on a dime, and that has happened. I understand how that can engender a lack of confidence. And that said, I think, again, I keep going back to the intention is we all want this to work, and it's going to be bumpy. Every new initiative is, especially of this magnitude.
Yeah, that's right. And is there a concern that you see from the provincial government that they will have to pay other than what the federal government has been giving to them? If the cost goes up, they will have to pay out of their pocket. The provincial government, is that the reason for uh, the negotiation, or uh, you know in the beginning, as you said, there were some reservations in terms of how much money to give for these extra activities. That has
Yes.
been sorted out. So is
Yeah.
this a concern that there could be money coming out of the provincial government's pocket, and they don't want that?
That I don't know. I mean, that's never been said, and any additional money that were required would have to go through their treasury board and the whole budget process and all of that. So I can't speak for the ministry. Um, I can say that funding is finite by definition, right? They've been given a certain allocation from the federal government, contracted to achieve certain outcomes and objectives, and now they're giving that to us to achieve at the local level. I can't really speak on behalf of, I've never heard the ministry speak to this. They're again confident that within the money they have, we can do what we need to do locally. That's been the message.
And does the county of Simcoe has concern that they might have to you know take the money out of their pocket to in terms of to pay to these daycare centers if the funding is not enough sufficient from the federal and provincial government?
You're right. The County of Simcoe has historically contributed funding, municipal funding, to licensed childcare sector, not the QUELP program. That is 100% provincial. And to date, there's been no discussion at council. I've not taken anything forward because I don't anticipate that will be the situation. And we're a long way from from having to address that in any way. So yeah, we'll cross that bridge if we come to it. I'm confident we can work within our allocation and have a really strong system.
Yeah, that's great. And just couple of last things. One is how how do you see this, the 13% holdout, or maybe as we are almost end of this year. So how do you see this program going into the next year, and this holdout 13% of how would they react, going into the next year?
Well, that's interesting. I think some of it will depend on the new 2023 ministry guidelines around QUELP, which haven't been, or Canada-wide Early Learning Childcare Program, which haven't been released yet. I do know that the guidelines for opting in or opting out could look different. I mean, they haven't committed one way or the other around what's going to be in those funding guidelines. So we should have those. Usually we get our allocation and related funding guidelines in November, late November. And at that time, then we'll see what Canada-wide program is looking like for 23. And we'll be having further conversations with those who, chose not to opt in this year.
Yeah, and just last question in terms of what do you want to say to those centers, right? Those are still not opt-in, or those who have opted in but still nervous, have anxiety about, because we are coming out of COVID, and we have seen these centers have suffered a lot. As you said, some of them have spent their lifetime building operations, and some of them, many of the workers work on minimum wage. And as we see, there is a fight going on when it comes to school to get the living wage, increase the wage, and the fight they have with the provincial government. So any message in terms of giving them assurance?
You know what? I think what I want to say overall is that as the system manager, we are really fortunate that we had a pre-existing great base of relationships with our operators, because it allowed us to have tough conversations, to have sometimes people would call very emotional conversations. This is livelihood, this is their business. And to both those who opted in and to those who opted out, I know those decisions weren't made lightly. I know that there was a great deal of discernment that went into deciding whether this was a direction that they felt comfortable going with. Our commitment as a service manager is to work with all of our licensees going forward, those who are in, those who are out. We want everyone to be successful. We still want to have a quality system. We want as many spaces as we can. We recognize the workforce shortage, and we're doing everything we can to try to build that. So we're just really grateful for the spirit of collaboration that we have with our licensees, and really respect how difficult a time this has been for them, especially on the heels of the pandemic. So we thank them.
Great. Yeah, that's really good to know. Thank you so much, Jan, for joining me today and answering the questions. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to meet you and to talk with you. I appreciate it.